And yet, Mr. Vice President, you were able to win the House and the Senate in 2024. Why can't you do it again without adding additional
But we had
seats?
but this is a very important question, Kristen. We had way fewer House seats than we should have. One, if the Democrats hadn't aggressively gerrymandered, and two, if illegal aliens weren't counted in the census for purposes of apportioning congressional seats. The best estimates I've seen is that in California, for example, has 5 additional congressional seats than it should have because they count illegal aliens for the purpose of apportioning representatives. Meanwhile, Ohio, my home state, lost a representative. We're literally losing representatives for American citizens in order to give congressional representation to illegal aliens. Republicans are trying to balance out the scales a little bit for basic fairness and for the integrity of our democracy, which the president cares about.
Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up, because what just happened on national TV between J.D. Vance and Kristen Welker was far from a typical Sunday debate. This wasn't the usual back and forth. It was a moment where the mainstream media thought they had the script all set. They expected to corner a conservative voice, but instead, the whole plan backfired. Welker came in like a shark smelling blood, armed with loaded questions and little traps. But J.D. Vance didn't just hold his ground, he dominated. He flipped her narrative upside down and revealed exactly what many Americans already believe about the media: more agenda than journalism. And the best part? Every setup, distortion, and half-truth ended up blowing up in her face.
Yet the Russians rejected the ceasefire proposal that President Trump put forward. There's no meeting plan between President Putin and President Zelensky. And this week, Russia targeted an American factory in Ukraine. There were 600 people inside at the time. No one was killed. What makes you think President Putin is serious about peace?
Well, I didn't say they conceded on everything, but what they have conceded is the recognition that Ukraine will have territorial integrity after the war. They've recognized that they're not going to be able to install a puppet regime in Kiev. That was, of course, a major demand at the beginning. And importantly, they've acknowledged that there is going to be some security guarantee to the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Again, have they made every concession? Of course they haven't. Should they have started the war? Of course they haven't. But we're making progress, Kristen. And what I admire about the president in this moment is he's not asking 3.5 years ago. He's not, trying to focus on every nitpicky detail of how this thing started 3.5 years ago. He's trying to focus on the nitpicky details of now, of what do the parties disagree on, what do they agree on, and how do you build a foundation from one side of that ledger to the other so that you can stop the killing.
But was President Trump, were you enraged when you learned that Russia targeted an American company based in Ukraine?
I don't
was
like
that
it,
not a slap
Kristen.
in the face
I
to
don't.
the peace
I don't
process?
like it, Kristen. But this is a war, and this is why we want to stop the killing. The Russians have done a lot of things that we don't like. A lot of civilians have died. We've condemned that stuff from the get-go. And frankly, President Trump has done more to apply pressure and to apply economic leverage to the Russians, certainly than Joe Biden did for 3.5 years when he did nothing but talk, but do nothing to bring the killing to a stop. So you ask me what I'm enraged by. What I'm enraged by is the continuation of the war. What I'm enraged by is a presidency and Joe Biden who for 3 years did nothing to end the killing. What I'm actually excited about right now is that we have a president who's engaging in energetic diplomacy to try to stop the killing. That's as it should be. I think the American people should be proud of it. And whatever the outcome of this, whether the war ends in 3 months or 6 months or hopefully not beyond, but maybe, we should be proud that we have a president who's trying to stop the killing. He's done it, by the way, 6 wars that the president has brought to a close all over the world. This would be the 7th. It's the most complicated, but
One of the sharpest moments came when Kristen Welker pressed J.D. Vance on Republican efforts to redraw maps and add new seats. She framed it as nothing more than a power grab. Asterisk, if Trump's agenda is so popular, why do Republicans need to gerrymander at all? Vance didn't flinch. Instead, he hit back with cold, undeniable facts. He pointed out that California has about 85 extra congressional seats because illegal immigrants are counted in census apportionment. Meanwhile, his own state of Ohio actually lost a seat because of it. That wasn't just a fact, it was rhetorical checkmate. Welker tried to spin it as Republicans cheating, but Vance exposed the bigger truth. Democrats have been gaming the system for decades. California inflated its power. Massachusetts gives Republicans 0 representation despite nearly 1/3 of the population voting red. And yet somehow, the villains are Texas and Ohio. Please, this is where Welker's smug line of questioning backfired. The moment she tried to dismiss Vance's point as weak, she ended up exposing her own ignorance of how congressional math really works. Viewers saw it clearly, and that's why clips of this exchange are now going viral across conservative media. The so-called gotcha moment turned into a boomerang.
Last week, and he said he actually doesn't think that new sanctions would force Putin into a ceasefire. Are sanctions now off the table, Mr. Vice President?
The sanctions aren't off the table, but we're going to make these determinations on a case-by-case basis. What do we think is actually going to exert the right kind of leverage to bring the Russians to the table? Now, you said sanctions were not going to lead to a ceasefire. I think that's obviously correct. If you look at the way the Russians have conducted themselves, they don't want a ceasefire. They don't want a ceasefire for complicated reasons. We, of course, have pushed for a ceasefire, but again, we don't control what Russia does. If we did, the war would have been over 7 months ago. What we do believe, though, is that we continue to have a lot of cards. The President of the United States has a lot of cards left to play to apply pressure to try to bring this conflict to a close, and that's what we're going to do.
You take me to my next question. Where exactly is the pressure on Russia to do anything if you're not right now imposing new sanctions? How do you get them to a place of getting to the table with Zelensky and stopping to drop bombs?
But, Kristen, I think that question betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of where we are. The president has applied aggressive economic leverage, for example, the secondary tariffs on India, to try to make it harder for the Russians to get rich from their oil economy. He's tried to make it clear that Russia can be reinvited into the world economy if they stop the killing, but they're going to continue to be isolated if they don't stop the killing. The president has applied more economic pressure to the Russians to stop this war than Biden did in 3 years. So the idea that we're not doing anything, we're already doing things right now, and this is how negotiation works. You do something, you talk to the parties, you try to see if there's a meeting of minds. Again, we believe we've already seen some significant concessions from both sides just in the last few weeks. We're going to eventually be successful, or we'll hit a brick wall. And if we hit a brick wall, then we're going to continue this process of negotiation, of applying leverage. This is the energetic diplomacy that's going to bring this war to a close.
I hear what you're saying about India. China is actually the largest buyer of Russian oil.
They're close. They're about equal.
Why no sanctions on China?
Well, obviously, we have a 54% tariff on the PRC right now. So we've already applied pretty hefty sanctions on the Chinese. And we've had a number of conversations at all levels of government to try to encourage the Chinese to be better partners in bringing this war to a close. So again, I think the question betrays a misunderstanding of what's going on. We are applying aggressive economic pressure to bring this war to a close. Maybe we'll apply additional pressure. Maybe if we feel like we're making progress, we'll dial that pressure back. That give and take is part of the negotiation that we think is working. It hasn't reached its final outcome yet, but we're going to keep on working on this.
Another lie, subtler but just as revealing, came when Welker badgered Vance on Russia and Ukraine. She pushed the idea that Trump and Vance were weak, soft, maybe even sympathetic to Putin. Her big question? Asterisk, if Russia keeps any Ukrainian land, doesn't that give China the green light to invade Taiwan? Classic trap. The kind of loaded, when did you stop beating your wife? Question designed to box him in. But Vance dismantled it. He calmly reminded her, and millions watching, that nearly every major war in history ends through negotiation. Territorial disputes, security guarantees, redrawn borders. Ugly, yes, but that's how peace is actually made. Welker didn't want that answer. She wanted a quick sound bite she could clip and weaponize. Instead, she got schooled on history. And when she pressed further, asking why Trump's team hadn't sanctioned China if they're buying Russian oil, Vance dropped the hammer. Asterisk, we already have a 54% tariff on China. Asterisk, that's not weakness. That's one of the toughest economic pressures in modern memory. Once again, she tried to paint Trump's team as passive. Instead, Vance revealed they were playing a bigger, more sophisticated game than she could even grasp. And that's when the triggered Karen label fit perfectly, because the more her talking points collapsed, the more frantic and aggressive she sounded. Meanwhile, the calmer Vance stayed. The worse she looked.